So, morning everybody. I'm Sean, and today we're going to be talking about selling up some or all of your property portfolio and how you'd go about doing that in a tax efficient manner. So moving on to the main body of this seminar, like I say, we're talking about capital gains tax. So just a quick summary on capital gains tax for people and the key points you need to know. You only pay capital gains tax on assets that you hold in your personal name, okay? If a company sells a property, say, it pays corporation tax on any gain, okay? So when I'm talking about capital gains tax now, I'm only talking about assets held in your personal name, okay? And how it works, you get whatever proceeds are from the sale to the third party, you deduct the purchase price, any enhancement expenditure, costs on disposal and acquisition, then you get your gain, reduce it by any relief or your annual exemption, and you pay tax on residential property at either 18% if the gain is within your basic rate band, which is not the case for many property investors. So it's mainly at 28%, and with capital gains tax, you have to pay it within 60 days and report it in the same time period as well for residential property. Okay, so on there, if you've got your glasses out, and because it's quite small, is an example that we'll refer back to when we're looking at the ways of mitigating the capital gains tax. Proceeds of 3 million, you can see the costs on disposal and everything else on there. So you get a subtotal of 1.9 million. The annual exemption is currently £12,300, but that's reducing to £6,000 in April. You've got the gain there of just shy of 2 million, all taxed at 28%, okay? So the three main ways of mitigating against capital gains tax are transferring an asset to a spouse before you sell it on to a third party, investing in enterprise investment schemes, which we'll touch on briefly, and the third and the main way that we've helped a lot of people to mitigate capital gains tax is through incorporation relief, okay? So we'll start with the easy one first and the simplest. So a common example of work we do for people after we've met them at these shows is whereby, say, a gentleman owns a property, 100% in his name, large capital gain on the property, thinking about selling up because of the EPCs or Section 21 or everything else that's going on with the property market at the moment, wants to sell up. The gain is like the example we talked about there, but he's married. The wife currently doesn't have any share of the property. So what they can do is transfer, say, 50% of the property into the wife's name. That takes place at nil gain, nil loss between spouses, spousal exemption. And then you can use the wife's annual exemption as well as the husband's annual exemption to mitigate the CGT. So just rolling forward to the example, hopefully. Yeah. So this is the same example as before, all the same numbers. The only difference is this annual exemption here was 12,300, it's now 24,600, and the capital gains tax liability has reduced by 28% of 12 grand, which is maybe, £4 grand-ish, something like that. So what are the pros and cons of this? The pros are it's relatively simple and cheap to set up, and it's good for relatively small gains. The cons are it's limited benefit. The annual exemption is reducing over the next 2 tax years, and you also need to give some thought to stamp duty, that you don't create a stamp duty issue when you do the transfer to spouse, which you may or may not create depending on your circumstances. Okay, so then moving on to the second way that people reduce their capital gains tax liabilities. So let's say you sell a property to a complete third party, you've got a large gain, you want to try and mitigate it. One way that some of our clients do this is by investing in companies that are part of the enterprise investment scheme, okay? And as it says on the screen there, this is not financial advice. I'm just advising you of the tax benefits and disadvantages if you were to invest in these types of investments. Now, what are enterprise investment scheme investments? Well, they are small. It's a government scheme that's to incentivize people to invest in small trading companies in the UK. These types of companies are the lifeblood of the economy, so the government want as many of them to be set up and be successful as possible, so they offer tax breaks to be able to fund these types of companies. So what they give you is they give you an income tax reducer of either 30 or 50%. So let's say you invested 100 grand. For an EIS company, you'd be able to get a 30 grand deduction against your income tax liability, or a 50% if you do even higher risk companies or smaller companies. And there's also capital gains tax can either be deferred or exempted when investing in these types of companies, okay? The pros of investing in these types of companies are that the savings could be significant. Like I say, you could save almost 80% of the investment in tax allowances, but it is risky. And the reason for these incentives is because your capital is at risk, and investments could go down, or companies could lose their status. So I just wanted to touch on that briefly as a way to do it, but it's not for most people or most property investors because, by very nature, you're quite risk averse. But thought I'd put it on there anyway because some of our clients do that. So now moving on to the main way that we've helped people mitigate large capital gains tax. And this is aimed really at people who are, selling a majority of their portfolio, if not all of it, okay? So it works by firstly, moving your portfolio from your personal name into a limited company, okay? Now, when you move a portfolio from personal name to limited company, there are 3 potential issues, and they are capital gains tax, stamp duty, and possibly needing to refinance the portfolio, okay? All 3 of them can be mitigated if you meet certain criteria, okay? Now, we've not really got time in this seminar to go through all those criteria. So your 2 options are either come back here at 1:30 when I'm going to be going through it in a lot more detail, or go onto my company's YouTube channel, if I can say that without cringing, and there's a seminar on there that kind of explains it. But in a nutshell, you need at least 5 or more properties generally to be able to move the portfolio to a company and not pay capital gains tax. You also need to be in some form of partnership, and with our clients it's usually a husband and wife general partnership, and that's very easy to demonstrate if both parties have been involved in the property investment and they've got 5 or more properties. And also on the refinancing as well, we do not move the legal ownership of the properties. We only move the beneficial ownership, and that removes the need to refinance on transferring a portfolio to a limited company, okay? Sorry, I'm having a few issues with this clicker here. Right, okay. So again, referring back to the example we talked about earlier, it's the same thing. Here we're talking about moving properties from personal name to limited company. So it's the same example, all the same numbers, but you'll notice here we've got incorporation relief, that if you meet the criteria, it fully wipes out the gain, and the properties can move into the company with no tax to pay on that transfer, okay? Now the benefit of that is, let's say you did this today, and in that example, the properties move into the limited company, and the company's deemed to acquire them at today's market value of £3 million, okay? If the company then sells, for the example, all of the properties in that company in the next, say, 12 months, and it sells them to complete third parties for £3 million, then the company's tax computation looks like this. It sells property for £3 million to complete third parties. The purchase price for the company is also £3 million, which means 0 gain, which therefore means 0 taxation, okay? But the thing to point out here is the equity, after you've paid off the mortgage, is not in your back pocket, it's in the limited company's bank account, okay? Now, that money can be reinvested in other assets through the limited company with no additional tax to pay. So what one of our clients is doing at the moment, selling all these HMOs and investing in commercial property. Other clients have just, invested the lump sum in a boring FTSE tracker that gives a, 5% return. and then they draw the money out of that company every year, like it says on there. And if a married couple who've got no other income in their personal name, through using a, say, 12.5 grand salary and each, which is 25 grand, and 75 grand of dividends, the effective rate of income tax on that is just 6.4%. So if you run the numbers, if you saved, say, hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds in capital gains tax by moving the properties to a company before selling them to third party, if you've saved millions there and you can take out the money at 6.4% over a number of years, I say it's akin to using a pension. There can be some huge savings there, okay? So the problem with that, yeah, there could be huge savings. It also opens more doors for inheritance tax planning if you've got assets in a company rather than property that's mortgaged and in your personal name. The cons are, it's quite expensive to set up, but you'd factor that in with the savings you'd make. But then key to it is the extraction of profits. So like I've said there, if a married couple's happy taking 100 grand every year and paying 6.4%, and you're going to do that for the next 20, 30 years, then this planning might work perfectly, okay? If you wanted to take out £500,000 from the company in one lump sum for whatever reason, say paying off a personal mortgage or buying some luxuries, then this planning probably isn't going to work for you, because that 6.4% on the extraction would maybe go up to 33%, which will eat into the savings you've made from the capital gains tax. Does that make sense to people? Yeah.
Sorry, if you've got a mortgage in your personal name and you do the incorporation, could you pay the mortgage off before your tax, or how would that work?
Yeah, so when you're moving these properties from your personal name to a limited company and they've got mortgages on, the company assumes the liability, it takes on the liability for that mortgage. So the company would be able to pay the interest and the capital down on that mortgage, and that would not count as an extraction of profits. So that would not affect what I've just said about increasing your tax liability. Okay? And the other thing as well is you need to be able to meet those criteria of 5 or more properties, ideally in some sort of partnership. And like I say, half one, we'll be going through there in a lot more detail. I think we've got 2 more minutes. I like to throw this in at the end about choosing the right advisor. Because in these trade shows these days, there's more and more advisors coming to these events. So it's just something to look out for, in my opinion. They all tell you, and I agree to some extent, that you need to have a specialist advisor. Don't just get a run-of-the-mill accountant to take your tax advice. Get some specialist advice. But you've got to check as well, have they become specialists? They're talking about tax planning. Have they got any taxation qualifications, so they can back up what they're saying? Have they been doing it for 5 minutes or 5 years? Are they a one-trick pony who's just trying to push one product down your throat, like a LLP hybrid solution, for instance, and not recommending anything else? Are they near retirement? Always do a Google of the directors' names as well. There's some good skeletons on Google. If you Google my name, you'll just see a rubbish comedian from the 90s. And do they use insurance as marketing? All those advisors have to have professional indemnity insurance, okay? But it shouldn't be a selling point. In the same way that you've got car insurance, you don't go out on the street and drive like Michael Schumacher. So it doesn't mean because an advisor's got insurance that you should do something that you don't understand or that's probably dodgy, in my opinion. So just be careful of that. And that said, like I say, most things these days in taxation is self-assessment. At the end of the day, the buck stops with you as the taxpayer, and if you don't understand it, you probably shouldn't do it, okay? There's a bit more about me, and an out-of-date picture when I'm a freestone lighter. And there's my contact details. So if you need anything else, come and have a word with me now. Like I say, our stand is near the stairs at the bottom. And thanks for your time, and thanks for your questions as well.